everyone. My name is Braden. I'm here at the Hurd Natural Science Museum and Wildlife Sanctuary in McKinney, Texas. And we are here out in Ken's Prairie, which is a restored blackland prairie site. So for this North Texas Giving Day, we're looking to raise money to restore more prairie sites similar to the one you see here. Most of our area here in North Texas is a part of the Blackland Prairie ecoregion, which means that prairies such as these and similar tallgrass prairies are really important for our native habitat and local species. Some of these species would include native pollinator insects, birds, rodents, mammals, and the like, including things such as reptiles, like snakes, and box turtles, and many, many others that require habitats just like these to survive. So our trophic structure here is very much reliant on the ability for plants such as these basket flowers to produce seeds for things such as birds, also the small rodents, but even so, like the eryngium here, which is a type of plant that works great for pollinators such as bumblebees and honeybees, butterflies and the like. There's going one now. With the continued and rapid development in North Texas, we have lost most of our blackland prairies, with less than 2% remaining in Texas today. With that loss, we are risking losing so much biodiversity and what we need to make our local and native habitats in Texas. So our goal is to continually recreate and restore these areas to the best of our abilities in order to provide habitat for all of these species that require them. And in order to do so, we're looking to reseed areas similar to the consistent and prevalent challenges we face with restoring habitats such as these is the presence of invasive species such as Johnson grass. Invasive species come in and they will outcompete our native flora and for things such as nutrients in the soil, light, and water, and other resources, which make it very challenging for our more struggled native species to grow. So when we look to restore areas like this, we have to consistently consider how we are going to remove invasive species and then how we are going to introduce native ones and help them to thrive in an area where there is high competition for resources. Since they are highly competitive and oftentimes have the ability to outcompete our native ones, when we leave invasive species, they consistently spread. Back to the example of Johnson grass will produce thousands and thousands of seed heads a season, and when you have thousands of seed heads, our plants that are from the area that have a harder time with a lack of these resources can't compete against these plants. And similarly, in forested habitats, you have this issue with, overgrowth that will outshade some of the undergrowth. And in different habitats, you see this in different forms. But with our invasive species, a lot of the wildlife here is not adapted to eat them. So if you think about it, if something is from a different continent, the habitat here is not developed in a way that the species here will even eat it. Let me rephrase that. When you have invasive species from other places, the inhabitants here aren't evolved in a way that they can even consume them in some cases. And this isn't always the case, but in many cases, things such as the pollinators, which would rather use plants such as these, can't utilize Johnson grass because it doesn't provide that kind of a resource.
Mind the plane.
It's gonna come right overhead.
And this is why we don't.
And this is why we're losing our prairies. Are you gonna record too? Thank you. Awesome.
Honestly, I think I'm gonna leave this part in.
You know what? It's the truth. It is what we deal with, so that's part of the other thing we deal with. And in general, invasive... Gonna let it go. One of the other issues we face with invasive species is the use of them in lawns and gardens. And when they are brought into the area, it is very, very challenging to keep them from coming back into the area. So even though this area is relatively clear of most of the big challenges with invasive species, there's always the chance that the seeds are still in the soil waiting to germinate next year, or they can be reintroduced again by traveling animals, traveling people. A lot of seeds go in the wind, they get stuck on clothes, they travel in water. And so if a bird visits somebody's yard that has a plethora of these invasive plants and then comes here, the seeds might be stuck underneath the feathers and intertwined within the animal to the point where it can travel and then reseed. So it requires constant attention and care and kind of an eye for the health of different parts of the habitat itself. So is this native plant actually being given the things it needs to thrive? Because you can place seeds, but you have to pay attention to if those seeds are able to actually, take advantage of the environment itself, or if you need to come in and take certain steps in order to maybe stir up soil nutrients or remove things that are over-competing against those other plants. One of the big aspects of prairie ecosystems was fires. And fires are scary, understandably, but a part of prairie, functioning was that seasonally, or in some cases depending on the area and the plants present, maybe every, bi-yearly or every couple of years, maybe once every 5, 6 years, you would have a fire. And this fire was usually started by something like lightning, and in similar cases where the thatch that had developed from dead and decaying plants at the base of the prairie system was fuel for the fire, and the fire would begin and it would quickly go across the prairie, and in some cases slow. It depends on the other resources such as lack of water, heat, etc. And what that would do is that would clear up all of the thatch at the base of the prairie, which would, prevent uncontrollable wildfires where thatch was getting too thick and it became too much fuel. And it also returned the soil nutrients, allowing seeds and other, positive things to come up from the base of the soil. And it would restore that space so that plants that needed space to grow and needed resources to grow didn't have to compete as heavily against other very developed plants. It was very important for woody shrub up. So, if you have a tree that starts growing, a couple trees here and there throughout a prairie is good for things such as our lovely birds of prey, which will utilize the tree to hunt for different rodents and such. But if you get too many of those trees in one area of the prairie, it no longer is a prairie because nothing can grow beneath the tree cover. So fires would also prevent saplings from getting bigger and taking over the areas of the prairie. Habitat fragmentation is one of the biggest issues that we're seeing today with biodiversity in prairie habitats. We can restore this area, which is, a few acres, but truthfully it used to be 12 million acres, and so that allowed for the consistent traveling of different animals, different nutrients, different trophic structures, which is the food web. And that was a big part of the prairie system, was that consistent ability to make their way around and go to different areas. So even though we have restored sites, they're very fragmented. So something that lives here can't necessarily go several miles that way across 4 highways to get to the other prairie to reproduce and nest there. It has to stay in this area, even if back in the day it wouldn't have stayed in this area. So we are kind of, even with restoring or recreating these habitats, we're still running into challenges with making them as natural as possible to these animals' natural instincts. So we are creating an oasis in these urban developed areas because, anything that lives out here, such as, a prairie nesting bird or a deer, rodent, all of these pollinating, insects, this bee can't go pollinate concrete. It needs these plants, and it needs a plethora of different types of plants in order to interact with them, because they interact with these plants in different ways. One animal might utilize one plant for food and a different one for seed, production, knocking the seeds everywhere. It might utilize different things to nest with. And it turns into this very, very complex community and population level structure within these environments. And that's something that requires, constant attention, because these things are constantly changing as we change our environment surrounding these areas.
That makes sense. So what are we going to do about that on North Texas Giving Day?
On North Texas Giving Day, we're looking to reseed more of our prairies to create less habitat fragmentation on our property. So we have a couple different prairie sites that are close to the main building, and these prairie sites have really good potential. They have some really nice things that are in there, and we want to increase the amount of native plants and hopefully beat out some of the invasive species which are currently trying to take over. And hopefully they are very near to each other. We're hoping to expand the range that we have and make it kind of more of a large prairie site to help increase the ability for different species. And it also decreases, certain types of edge habitat, because edge habitat's harder for a lot of species. They need dense, habitat that is developed for their survival, rather than something on the edge of a sidewalk, or, the larger a habitat is, the more space there is for something to survive within the midst of that, ecosystem. The other thing that was very exciting to me personally about developing these areas closer to the main building is that I'm looking to put in more wildflowers and bring in more bunch grasses, which will help to make the area dense and healthy, and also hopefully bring in lots more of the butterflies and the bees and things that are absolutely gorgeous to view, and birds which will come in and nest in that area. And having those areas closer to the building means it'll be very easy for people to visit and come out, and just with a short walk out the back door you can go out and visit these areas and get up close and personal with these things and really experience and interact with it, like we do every day when we come out and we are looking at these things and paying attention and getting engaged with it. So when you have an area, if you have only one plant, or a monoculture as it's often referred to, that plant can only serve so many things. So we often use the term host plants specifically when you're talking about different species of butterflies, and different insects is usually the big reference there. But if a plant can only host this 3 types of insect, for example, then that's all you're going to see. So biodiversity is very important for trophic structure, because the more you have in an area typically means the better, because you are creating more habitat and even microclimate type habitats for each individual type of animal. So even we get into birds, reptiles, small rodents. This small rodent might only be able to eat things from this certain plant. Maybe the seed is only the only thing that it can eat. Well, if we have flowers but none of them produce that seed, you're never going to have that rodent there, which that rodent has its own important purpose in the food web and the trophic structure, which would be, for example, to eat up certain vegetation that might be overgrowing, or to feed our birds of prey, which we love, and eat other insects such as grasshoppers or cicadas. So when you have a trophic structure, it's very important to have as many levels as possible and to really delve into understanding the community there and how those interactions impact each other. Besides just simply eating, community interaction is something that goes much deeper in terms of energy exchange and habitat, interaction. So this rodent might interact with the habitat in a way that creates a new niche and a new habitat for an insect to come live there, which would not have been created before without that rodent or without the bird or similar things. It is much more interconnected than I would go to say we will ever understand. There is such a deep level of every step that something takes could theoretically impact the microbials in the soil or the light that's impacting this plant, which sounds a little dramatic, but truth is that's how all living things interact in terms of interactions, especially in dense habitats such as these, because every spot you can go every square foot and see something entirely different. You might see an entirely different set of flora, an entirely different set of fauna, and it's very, very interesting to observe those things and to try to understand how we can better encourage these things to continue to be healthy systems, which are so important for so many parts of society, even to the point of food production. We need our pollinators to produce food for everyone. We need our pollinators to pollinate our growing plants. We need pollinators to help move these seeds and move the pollen. We need birds to do similar things, and deer to do similar things. When they eat these seeds and they travel, they leave the seeds somewhere else. These help these systems continue and fluctuate with the change of our environment. Public help is so important in more than one way. One of the biggest ways is because these things are not often supported in a heavily developing area. So I'm trying to think of how to phrase this.
There's the hummingbird out there.
Oh, how sweet.
Sorry, distraction.
Oh no, I'm trying to think how to phrase it. We need public help because the truth is that these things are important for everyone. They are an important part of everybody's day-to-day life, whether or not we can understand that. And having the help and support to continually restore and help preserve these areas is something that's going to be very important as we move forward into urbanization and we start to lose more and more of these habitats. And it's one of those things that you don't realize how much that these bumblebees might do for everybody on a day-to-day basis. But it all is very interconnected, even though we all drive cars and go to work and live in our homes. The things that happen in habitats outside of these parts of our lives are so important. And having that public help is something that raises awareness for the importance for other people who may just not know. And it also helps encourage people to get involved and enjoy these parts of the environment, which helps to further support and preserve them in the future. We need your help because the Herd is a nonprofit organization, which means that we are here for this. We are here to help preserve and recreate and restore all of these areas and to continue science and education in these important areas. So with help from people at home and from help with people in the community, we are able to continually provide these types of resources for our environment and for people to come and enjoy and engage and learn from. Thank you so much for joining, and we appreciate all of your continued support, and I hope to see you all out here very soon, especially next spring when we have beautiful wildflowers and lots of fun pollinators, so come give us a visit.